I'm Mia, 28 years old, and I just canceled a 3-year automatic transfer that was bleeding me dry. My parents haven't spoken to me in 2 weeks, and honestly, the silence is the most peaceful thing I've experienced in years. But let me back up to where this all started, because the story of how I went from dutiful daughter to family outcast isn't what you'd expect. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt taken advantage of by the people who should love you most. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. 3 years ago, I was the poster child for family loyalty. Every Friday, like clockwork, I'd send $800 to my parents' account. Not because they asked nicely, mind you, but because they'd perfected the art of making me feel guilty if I even hesitated. Mia, sweetheart, Mom would say in that voice that somehow managed to be both sweet and manipulative. Your father's arthritis is acting up again, and you know how expensive his medication is. Dad would chime in with stories about their fixed income and how they were barely scraping by in their little rental house. The same rental house where they'd lived for 15 years, never bothering to save for a down payment because, well, why would they need to when they had me? I worked 2 jobs to make those payments happen. Monday through Friday, I was a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm downtown. Evenings and weekends, I freelanced ASA social media manager for small businesses. While my friends were out enjoying their 20s, I was hunched over my laptop at midnight, creating Instagram posts for boutiques and dog grooming services. I was basically running a one-person charity for people who thought thank you cards were optional. The math was brutal but simple. My take-home pay was about $3,000 a month. $800 went to my parents immediately. Another $1,000 covered my rent in a cramped studio apartment that I'd outgrown 2 years earlier, but couldn't afford to leave. Food, utilities, student loans, and gas for my ancient Honda Civic ate up most of the rest. Savings? What savings? The concept was as foreign to me as a vacation to Europe. But here's what kept me going through those exhausting years. My parents' gratitude, or what I thought was gratitude. You're such a good daughter, Mia, they'd tell me during our weekly phone calls. We don't know what we'd do without you. Those words were like a drug. After years of feeling like the unremarkable middle child, sandwiched between my older brother who'd moved to California and seemed to forget we existed, and my younger sister who'd married into money and considered herself above us all, I'd finally found my role in the family. I was the reliable one, the one who came through when it mattered, the one they could count on. What I didn't realize then was that reliability, when it's one-sided, isn't love. It's exploitation with a pretty bow on top. The irony is that I thought I was building something meaningful. Every transfer felt like an investment in our relationship, proof that I was worthy of their affection. I imagined future family gatherings where they'd tell everyone how I'd saved them, how I'd been their hero during their golden years. I pictured myself as the daughter who'd earned her place through sacrifice and devotion. Looking back, I can see how naive that was. But when you're raised to believe that love is earned rather than freely given, you'll work yourself to death trying to prove you deserve it. And that's exactly what I was doing, working myself to death when I met David. David walked into my life on a random Tuesday afternoon when I was having the worst possible day. My laptop had crashed that morning, taking 3 days of client work with it. My car had started making that weird grinding noise that meant expensive repairs were coming. And I'd just gotten off a particularly draining call with Mom about their latest financial emergency. I was standing in line at the electronics store, clutching my dead laptop and probably looking like I was about to cry, when this tall guy behind me started talking. "MacBook Pro?" he asked, nodding toward my laptop case. "Was," I replied, not really in the mood for small talk. "Now it's an expensive paperweight." He laughed, and something about the sound made me actually look at him. Brown skin, kind eyes, and a smile that seemed genuinely amused rather than polite. "I'm a software engineer," he said. "Want me to take a look? Might be salvageable." Normally, I would have politely declined. I wasn't the type to accept help from strangers, especially attractive male strangers who probably had ulterior motives. But I was desperate, and something about his demeanor felt safe. "You'd do that?" I asked. "Sure. There's a coffee shop next door. Give me 20 minutes and I'll at least tell you if it's worth fixing or if you should start shopping for a replacement." 20 minutes turned into 2 hours. David not only fixed my laptop, he also optimized it so it ran faster than it had in months. More importantly, we talked. Really talked in a way I hadn't experienced with anyone in years. He was intelligent without being condescending, funny without being cruel, and when I mentioned that I worked 2 jobs, he didn't immediately ask why I needed the money or suggest that I was being irresponsible with my finances. "That must be exhausting," he said instead, and the simple acknowledgement of my reality was so refreshing that I nearly teared up. We started dating slowly, coffee dates that turned into dinner dates that turned into weekend adventures around the city. David was everything I hadn't known I was looking for. Stable, kind, ambitious but not ruthless. And most importantly, he seemed to see me as a whole person, rather than just a function. For the first time in years, I had something in my life that was purely mine. My parents didn't need to approve of David, didn't need to benefit from my relationship with him, and didn't need to be involved in every aspect of our connection. It was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. Of course, I couldn't keep him to myself forever. After 6 months of dating, it felt natural to introduce him to my family. I was nervous, but hopeful. David was successful, respectful, and clearly crazy about me. What wasn't to like? The first meeting was at my parents' house for Sunday dinner, a tradition I'd maintained religiously despite my packed schedule. I'd warned David that they were a little old-fashioned and might need time to warm up to him, but I wasn't prepared for what actually happened. They were polite, almost aggressively polite. "David, how lovely to meet you," Mom said, her smile bright enough to power the neighborhood. "Mia has told us so much about you." Dad stood up to shake his hand, which was unusual. Dad usually stayed planted in his recliner unless the house was on fire. "Welcome to our home," he said formally, like David was a visiting dignitary rather than his daughter's boyfriend. Throughout dinner, they peppered him with questions that felt more like an interview than a conversation. What did he do for work? Where did he grow up? What were his career goals? His family background? David handled it all gracefully, answering their questions with humor and humility. He complimented Mom's cooking, asked Dad about his woodworking hobby, and generally charmed them exactly the way I'd hoped he would. But something felt off. There was a stiffness to their interactions, a forced quality to their smiles. They were trying too hard to appear accepting, which made me wonder what they were really thinking. After dinner, while David was in the bathroom, Mom pulled me aside. "He seems very nice, sweetheart," she said carefully. "But?" I prompted, sensing the unspoken reservation. "But nothing," she said quickly. "He's obviously intelligent and successful. We just want to make sure he's right for you." "What do you mean by that?" She exchanged a glance with Dad, who had joined us in the kitchen. "Well, you know how important family compatibility is," Dad said. "It's not just about the two people in the relationship. It's about how well everyone fits together." I didn't understand what they meant then. I thought they were just being overprotective parents, maybe a little suspicious of any man who wanted to date their daughter. I had no idea they were already deciding whether David was the right race to join their family. The subtle comments started about a month after that first dinner. Little remarks that seemed innocent on the surface, but left me feeling unsettled in ways I couldn't quite articulate. "David's so articulate," Mom would say after our phone calls where I'd mentioned something he'd said or done. "You can tell he had a good education. He's very professional," Dad would add approvingly. "Not like some of the young men these days." At first, I thought they were being complimentary, but there was something in their tone, a mild surprise that made me uncomfortable, like they hadn't expected David to be intelligent or well-spoken. When I brought David to their anniversary dinner 2 months later, the comments became more direct. "You know, Mia," Mom said while we were clearing dishes, "I was just thinking about your future. Have you two talked about children?" "Mom," I said, laughing uncomfortably, "we've only been dating 8 months. I know, I'm just saying, when you do have children someday, you'll want to think about what they'll look like, how they'll fit in." The words hit me like ice water. "What do you mean, how they'll fit in?" "Well," she glanced toward the living room where David was talking with Dad. "Mixed children sometimes have identity issues, don't they? Not knowing where they belong." I stared at her, waiting for her to clarify, to somehow make those words mean something other than what they clearly meant. But she just continued loading the dishwasher as if she'd commented on the weather. "Mom, that's incredibly racist." "It's not racist to be practical, Mia. I'm just thinking about potential challenges." Ah, yes, practical concerns. The polite person's way of saying something incredibly racist without owning up to it. Dad appeared in the doorway at that moment. "Everything okay in here?" "Just girl talk," Mom said brightly. Mia and I were discussing the future. The drive home was tense. David had noticed the shift in atmosphere, even if he hadn't heard the specific comment. "Did I say something wrong?" he asked. "Your parents seemed upset about something." I wanted to tell him the truth, but I was still processing it myself. How do you explain that your parents, who raised you to treat everyone with respect, had just revealed themselves to be the kind of people who judge others based on skin color? "They're just protective," I said weakly. "They need time to get used to the idea of me being serious about someone." But the comments continued, and they got worse. "He's very nice," Mom would say about David. "But you know his culture is very different from ours. Do you really think you'd fit in with his family?" "What's his culture, Mom? He's from Ohio." "You know what I mean." No, I didn't know what she meant. Or rather, I knew exactly what she meant, and I was desperately trying to pretend I didn't. David's family, when I finally met them, was warm, welcoming, and treated me like a beloved addition to their circle. His mother hugged me the moment we walked through the door. His father asked about my work and actually listened to the answers. His siblings teased him about being smitten and included me in their jokes. The contrast was stark and painful. "They really like you," David said on the drive home from his parents' house. "Mom already asked when you're coming to Sunday dinner again." I smiled, but inside I was aching. This was what family acceptance felt like. This easy warmth, this immediate inclusion, this assumption that I belonged simply because David cared about me. It was everything my parents had failed to offer David. Everything they seemed incapable of offering him. But I made excuses for them. I told myself they just needed more time, that they'd come around once they got to know him better. I convinced myself that their concerns came from love rather than prejudice. I was still sending those $800 every week, still playing the role of the grateful daughter who owed them for all the sacrifices they'd made for me. Have you ever experienced that kind of cognitive dissonance? When the people you love show you exactly who they are, but you refuse to believe it? Let me know in the comments below. I was about to learn that some people don't change, no matter how much you want them to. The pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines on a rainy Thursday morning in November. David and I had been together for a year and a half, living together for 6 months, and talking about marriage in that casual way couples do when they're both sure but not quite ready to make it official. The baby hadn't been planned, but it wasn't unwelcome either. We were both financially stable, deeply in love, and excited about building a future together. David's reaction when I told him was everything I could have hoped for. Pure joy followed immediately by protective instinct. "Are you happy?" he asked, his hands already moving to my still flat stomach. "Terrified and happy," I admitted. "But mostly happy." "Good," he said, kissing my forehead. "Because I'm completely over the moon about this." Telling my parents was a different story. I called them that evening, expecting surprise, maybe some gentle concern about the timing, but ultimately excitement about their first grandchild. The silence that followed my announcement stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Mom? Dad? Are you there?" "Yes," Mom said finally. "We're here." "That's quite a surprise, sweetheart." "A good surprise, I hope." Another pause. "Well, it's certainly unexpected. You two aren't even engaged yet, are you?" "Not officially, but we've talked about it. This just moves up the timeline a little." "I see." Dad's voice sounded strained. "And you're sure about this? About David being the father you want for your children?" The question struck me as odd. "Of course I'm sure. I love him, and he loves me. He's going to be an amazing father." "It's just a big responsibility, Mia," Mom interjected. "Raising a child is hard enough when both parents come from similar backgrounds. When there are cultural differences—" "What cultural differences?" I snapped, my patience finally wearing thin. "We're both American. We both work in tech. We both want the same things for our future. You know what we mean." And there it was again. That phrase that meant everything and nothing. The coward's way of being racist without actually saying the words. "No, Mom, I don't know what you mean. Why don't you explain it to me?" The line went quiet except for some whispering between my parents. "We're just concerned about the challenges the child might face," Dad said finally. "In school, in society, it's not easy being different." "Different from what?" More silence. "Look," Mom said, her voice taking on that fake cheerful tone she used when she wanted to change the subject. "We're happy if you're happy. When are you due?" I gave them the basic details, but the conversation felt hollow. There were no congratulations, no excitement about becoming grandparents, no questions about baby names or nursery plans. Just barely concealed disappointment and thinly veiled concerns about my child's racial identity. Over the following weeks, their reaction became even more clear. They found excuses to avoid our usual weekly dinners. When David and I invited them to a prenatal appointment, they claimed to have prior commitments. When I sent them the ultrasound photos, Mom responded with a brief text. "Glad everything looks healthy." David noticed, of course. He'd have to be blind not to see how differently his family was treating our news compared to mine. "It's okay," he told me one night when I was crying about their latest excuse to avoid spending time with us. "Not everyone gets excited about babies the same way." But I could see the hurt in his eyes. The way he'd grown quieter around me when the subject of my parents came up. He was trying to protect me from his own disappointment, which somehow made it worse. The contrast with his family's reaction was painful. His mother immediately started knitting baby blankets. His father began researching the best car seats and cribs. His sister threw us an impromptu celebration dinner, complete with a cake that said, "Baby Sanders coming soon." They treated me like family. They treated our child like a blessing. My parents treated us like a problem they hoped would solve itself. By month 6, I'd started making excuses for my parents' absence from baby-related events. David never questioned my explanations, but I could tell he was drawing his own conclusions about why my family seemed so disinterested in our growing family. The weekly $800 transfers continued automatically. Even as I was buying maternity clothes, setting up a nursery, and planning for increased expenses, I never questioned whether my parents still needed my financial support. After all, they were going to be grandparents soon. Surely that would change everything. I was about to discover just how wrong I was. Ethan David Sanders was born on June 15th at 3:47 a.m. after 18 hours of labor that felt like a marathon I'd trained my whole life for. He was perfect. 8 pounds, 2 ounces of pure miracle, with David's determined chin, and what the nurses swore was my stubborn streak already showing. David cried when he held his son for the first time. Actually cried, tears streaming down his face as he whispered promises about all the things they'd do together, all the ways he'd protect and love him. "He's so beautiful," David kept saying. "Mia, look at him. He's perfect." I called my parents from the recovery room, exhausted but glowing with new mother euphoria. "He's here," I said when Mom answered. "Ethan David Sanders, born this morning, 8 pounds, 2 ounces, and absolutely perfect." "Oh," Mom said, and I could hear the forced enthusiasm in her voice. "Congratulations, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Tired but amazing. He's so beautiful, Mom. You're going to fall in love the moment you meet him." "I'm sure we will. When do you think we might be able to visit?" The question struck me as odd. When did parents need permission to meet their first grandchild? "Anytime you want. Anytime you..." "We'll be here until tomorrow, then home for the next few weeks while I recover." "Well, your father's been having some back trouble lately, and you know how difficult it is for him to travel." "Mom, you live 20 minutes away." I know. We'll figure something out soon. Give the baby our love." They didn't visit us in the hospital. They didn't come by the house in those precious first weeks when everything was new and overwhelming and wonderful. When I sent photos, they responded with brief acknowledgments. "Cute baby," or "glad he's healthy." David's family, meanwhile, had practically moved in. His mother brought meals, his father assembled the crib I'd been struggling with, and his sister documented every milestone with the enthusiasm of a professional photographer. "Where are your parents?" David's mom asked gently during one of her visits. "I'd love to meet them." I made excuses. They were busy. Dad wasn't feeling well. They were giving us space to adjust to being new parents. But David knew. I could see it in the way he watched me when I hung up from their brief, stilted phone calls. The way he'd quietly take over when I got emotional after another canceled visit. When Ethan was 2 months old, my parents finally came to see him. They stayed for exactly 45 minutes, held him awkwardly when I insisted, and made polite conversation about his sleep schedule and feeding routine. "He's a good-looking baby," Dad said, and it sounded like he was commenting on a stranger's child at the grocery store. "He has David's eyes," Mom added, as if this was somehow disappointing. They didn't ask to babysit. They didn't offer to help with anything. They didn't mention wanting to be involved in his life in any meaningful way. It was like they were visiting out of obligation rather than love. After they left, I sat in the nursery holding my sleeping son and finally allowed myself to acknowledge what I'd been trying to ignore for months. My parents were rejecting their own grandchild because of the color of his skin. David found me there an hour later, tears streaming down my face. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. "They don't love him," I whispered. "They don't love our son." David sat beside me on the rocking chair, wrapping his arms around both of us. "Then they don't deserve him," he said simply. "And they definitely don't deserve you." But I wasn't ready to accept that truth yet. I kept hoping they'd come around, that time would soften their hearts, that their love for me would eventually extend to their grandchild. I was still sending those weekly transfers, still playing the role of the dutiful daughter, still believing that my loyalty would somehow transform their bigotry into love. As Ethan's first birthday approached, I decided to throw him a party. Nothing elaborate, just family and close friends celebrating this amazing little person who'd brought so much joy into our lives. I invited my parents 3 weeks in advance. They said they'd be there. I should have known better. Planning Ethan's first birthday party became my obsession for weeks. I wanted everything to be perfect for this milestone, this celebration of our beautiful son's first year of life. I chose a safari theme because Ethan loved the stuffed lion David's sister had given him. I ordered decorations featuring friendly jungle animals, found the perfect little safari outfit for Ethan to wear, and planned a menu of toddler-friendly finger foods alongside adult options. The guest list was small but meaningful. David's family, a few close friends from work, my neighbor Sarah, who'd become like an honorary aunt to Ethan, and of course my parents. I called Mom 2 weeks before the party to confirm the details. It's Saturday the 15th at 2 o'clock, I reminded her. I'm making that coconut cake you love, and I thought Dad might enjoy grilling some burgers for everyone. That sounds lovely, sweetheart. Your father's been looking forward to it. Looking forward to it. The first sign of enthusiasm they'd shown about anything related to Ethan in months. I threw myself into preparations with the kind of energy that only comes from desperate hope. Maybe this would be the turning point. Maybe seeing Ethan surrounded by people who loved him, watching him giggle and clap and be his charming toddler self, would finally break through their emotional barriers. I spent hours making decorations, baking his smash cake from scratch, and setting up our small backyard to look like a magical jungle paradise. David helped when he could, but I could see the worry in his eyes. "Mia," he said gently the night before the party as I fussed over centerpiece arrangements, "what happens if they don't show up?" "They'll show up," I said quickly. "They confirmed 3 times this week. But what if they don't?" I couldn't answer that question because I couldn't bear to consider the possibility. If they missed Ethan's first birthday after specifically promising to be there, what would that say about who they really were? What would it say about the family I'd been financially supporting for 3 years? Saturday morning dawned bright and perfect. I was up early, double-checking every detail, making sure the house was spotless and the food was ready. Ethan woke up in one of his happy moods, babbling and clapping when he saw his safari decorations. David's family arrived first, arms full of presents and genuine excitement. His mother immediately swept Ethan into her arms, covering him with grandmother kisses, while his father set up a photo backdrop I'd created. "Where should we put the gifts?" David's sister asked, carrying what looked like half a toy store. "The dining room table," I said, my eyes constantly moving to the window, watching for my parents' car. Friends began arriving around too, each person lighting up when they saw Ethan in his little safari vest and khaki shorts. He was in his element, the center of attention, showing off his newest accomplishments like standing without support and clapping on command. By 2:30, everyone was there except my parents. "Should we start with the food?" David asked quietly. "Let's wait a few more minutes," I said, checking my phone for messages. Nothing. 3 o'clock came and went. Ethan was getting fussy, ready for his nap, and our guests were politely trying not to notice the empty spaces at the table I'd set for my parents. "I'm sure they're just running late," Sarah said kindly, but her eyes were sympathetic in a way that made my stomach clench. At 3:30, I finally called Mom's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried Dad's phone. Same thing. David found me in the kitchen, gripping the counter with white knuckles. "Hey," he said softly. "It's okay. Let's just celebrate our son with the people who are here." But it wasn't okay. It was the opposite of okay. This was their grandson's first birthday, and they'd simply decided not to show up. No call, no text, no explanation. We went through the motions of the party. Ethan smashed his cake with gusto, getting frosting in his hair and all over his safari outfit. Everyone laughed and took pictures and told him what a big boy he was. But I felt hollow inside, going through the motions while my heart broke a little more with each passing hour. After everyone left and Ethan was down for his belated nap, I sat in our living room surrounded by empty plates and crumpled wrapping paper, finally allowing myself to face the truth. My parents had deliberately missed their grandson's first birthday. Nothing says loving grandparents quite like ghosting your grandson's first birthday party. Not because of an emergency, not because they forgot, but because they'd made a choice about what mattered to them, and their mixed-race grandson didn't make the list. David sat beside me on the couch, not saying anything, just being present while I processed this new level of betrayal. "I have to call them," I said finally. "Are you sure? I need to know why. What happened next would change everything." I waited until Sunday evening to call, giving them a full day to reach out with an explanation, an apology, anything. But my phone remained silent. David was giving Ethan his bath when I finally dialed their number, my hands shaking slightly as I listened to the familiar ring. "Hello?" Mom's voice sounded normal, cheerful even, like she hadn't just missed the most important day of her grandson's short life. "Mom, it's me." "Oh, hi, sweetheart. How are you doing?" The casual tone, as if nothing had happened, as if yesterday hadn't been circled on our family calendar for weeks, nearly knocked the breath out of me. "I'm confused," I said carefully. "We missed you at Ethan's party yesterday." A pause. Then, "Oh, that. Yes, something came up at the last minute." "Something came up?" "Your father wasn't feeling well, and you know how these things go." "Mom, this was Ethan's first birthday. His first birthday." "I know, sweetheart, and we felt terrible about missing it. But there will be other birthdays. Other birthdays. Like his first was just any other day. Like the celebration I'd spent weeks planning was easily replaceable." "What came up exactly?" I pressed. What was so important that you couldn't even call to let us know you weren't coming? Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear muffled conversation in the background, like she was covering the phone and talking to Dad. Well, if you must know, she said when she came back, her tone shifting to something cooler. We had some concerns about the whole situation. What situation? The party, Mia. All those people, all that fuss over a 1-year-old who won't even remember it. My mouth fell open. Are you serious right now? We just thought maybe you were going a bit overboard, making such a big deal out of everything. I could feel anger building in my chest, hot and unfamiliar. I'd made excuses for them for months, found ways to rationalize their distance, their lack of enthusiasm, their obvious discomfort around my son. But this was different. This was deliberate cruelty. Mom, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Why don't you just tell me the real reason you didn't come? I just told you. No, you gave me an excuse. Tell me the truth. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter but somehow more devastating than if she'd screamed. Because he doesn't fit into our family, Mia. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually gasped, my free hand instinctively moving to my chest. What did you just say? You heard me. That child, he's not really one of us. You chose this path, and now you have to live with the consequences. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I'd just heard from the woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me to treat all people with respect and kindness. How can you say that? I whispered when I found my voice. He's your grandson, your blood. He's David's son first, she said coldly. And David's people will love him just fine. We don't need to pretend he belongs with us when clearly he doesn't. The line went quiet, except for my ragged breathing. Mia? Mom's voice had returned to its artificially sweet tone. Are you there? What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments below. That question hung in the air between us like poison gas, and I finally understood that my parents hadn't just rejected my son. They'd rejected the woman I'd become, the family I'd chosen, the love I'd found. They'd been taking my money for 3 years while harboring this ugliness in their hearts, but they had no idea what they'd just unleashed. I'm here, I said finally, my voice eerily calm. I'm just trying to understand what you're telling me. We're telling you the truth, Mia. Dad's voice came on the line. They must have switched to speakerphone. We never asked you to get involved with someone like him. Someone like him. The casual racism in those 4 words was breathtaking. Someone like what, Dad? You know what we mean. There it was again. That phrase they'd been hiding behind for months. The coward's way of being bigoted without taking responsibility for their bigotry. No, I don't know what you mean, I said. Why don't you explain it to me? I could hear them whispering to each other, probably trying to decide how honest they wanted to be. We raised you better than this, Mom said finally. Better than what? Better than falling in love with a good man? Better than building a beautiful family? Better than being happy? We raised you to understand the importance of staying with your own kind, Dad said bluntly. Your own kind. The mask was finally off. After months of coded language and veiled comments, they were showing me exactly who they really were. My own kind, I repeated slowly. You mean white people? We mean people who share your values, your background, your way of life, Mom said defensively. David shares all of those things. No, he doesn't. He's different, and you know it. And that baby don't, I cut her off sharply. Don't you dare say one more word about my son. He's not going to fit in anywhere, Mia. Not really. Not with us. Not with them. Mixed children always struggle with identity issues. The clinical way she said it, like she was discussing a medical condition rather than her own grandchild, made my stomach turn. His name is Ethan, I said quietly. Your grandson's name is Ethan, and he is the most beautiful, intelligent, joyful child I've ever known. David's family adores him. My friends adore him. He fits in perfectly everywhere except with you. We're just trying to be realistic about the challenges. No, I interrupted, something shifting inside me like a gear clicking into place. You're trying to justify your racism by pretending it's concern. But I see you now. I see exactly who you are. The silence that followed was deafening. Mia, Mom's voice was softer now, maybe sensing they'd pushed too far. We love you. We just think, you love the version of me that sends you money every week, I said, surprising myself with how clear my thoughts suddenly were. You love the daughter who sacrifices her own happiness to keep you comfortable, but you don't love the real me. You certainly don't love my family. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked how David was doing? When was the last time you showed genuine interest in Ethan's development? When was the last time you acted like you wanted to be part of our lives, rather than just the beneficiaries of my bank account? They didn't answer. I worked 2 jobs for 3 years. I continued, my voice getting stronger. 2 jobs, Dad. Nights and weekends, sacrificing my own financial security to make sure you were comfortable. And this whole time, you've been judging the man I love and rejecting the child we created together. We never asked you to. Yes, you did. You absolutely did. Every guilt trip about your medical bills, every story about struggling on your fixed income, every time you made me feel selfish for wanting something for myself. You asked for it, and I gave it to you because I thought family was supposed to take care of family. I was pacing now. The phone pressed against my ear, adrenaline coursing through my system. But family isn't supposed to be conditional, is it? Family isn't supposed to depend on everyone looking the same, or believing the same things, or making the same choices. Mia, you're being dramatic. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I've been funding your retirement while you've been silently disapproving of every important thing in my life. The truth of it hit me like a freight train. I stopped pacing, my free hand moving to my mouth. Oh my God, I whispered. What? But I was already hanging up the phone, my mind racing with numbers and dates and the devastating clarity of hindsight. I had some calculations to do. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, pulling up 3 years of bank records while David put Ethan to bed. The automatic transfers were all there, documented with brutal efficiency. $800 every Friday for 156 weeks. The math was simple and devastating. $124,800. $124,800. Nearly my entire annual salary for those 3 years. Gone to support people who'd been harboring racist views about the man I loved and the child we'd created together. But it wasn't just the transfers. There had been extras. Emergency dental work for Dad. $200. A new water heater when theirs broke. $800. Mom's unexpected medical bills. $2,000. New tires for their car. $600. The deposit on their current rental when they had to move. $1,500. I kept a meticulous spreadsheet, adding up every additional payment I could remember. The total was staggering. Over $131,000 in 3 years. Mia? David appeared in the doorway, concern written across his face. Everything okay? You've been in here for 2 hours? I turned the laptop screen toward him. Look at this. He whistled low when he saw the numbers. This is what you've been sending them? Every week, for 3 years. And you know what the really sick part is? What? I convinced myself I was investing in our relationship. I thought I was buying their love, their respect, their acceptance. I thought if I just sacrificed enough, they'd eventually see how much I cared about them. David sat down beside me, his hand finding mine. And instead? Instead, they've been taking my money while deciding my son isn't good enough for their family. I pulled up their bank account information, which I still had access to since I'd been making the transfers for so long. The balance made me laugh bitterly. They have $43,000 in their checking account, I said. $43,000. They've been crying poverty while sitting on enough money to live comfortably for a year. Turns out I'd been funding the world's most expensive racists. There should be a Yelp review category for that. David was quiet for a long moment, studying the screen. What do you want to do? I knew what I wanted to do. The question was whether I had the courage to actually do it. I want to cancel the automatic transfer. Okay. I want to block their phone numbers. Okay. I want to write them a letter explaining exactly why they'll never see another dollar from me. And then I want to move on with my life like they never existed. David squeezed my hand. Sounds like a plan. You don't think I'm being too harsh? Mia, he said gently. They called our son a misfit who doesn't belong in their family. They missed his first birthday on purpose. They've been taking your money while treating you and us with barely concealed contempt. If anything, you're being too generous. I spent the next hour crafting the letter. I wrote draft after draft, trying to find the right balance between devastating honesty and dignified restraint. Finally, I settled on something that felt appropriately final. Mom and Dad. After our conversation tonight, some things have become crystal clear to me. For 3 years, I have sent you $800 every week, plus additional money for emergencies and unexpected expenses. The total amount is approximately $131,000. I did this because I believed family takes care of family. I believed that love meant sacrifice, and that my sacrifice would strengthen our relationship. I was wrong. You have made it clear that my husband and son are not welcome in your family because of their race. You missed Ethan's first birthday deliberately, and when confronted, you told me he doesn't fit in with us. You have taken my money while harboring these views. You have allowed me to support you financially while rejecting the people I love most. Effective immediately, all financial support will cease. I am removing your access to my accounts and blocking your phone numbers. If you need money in the future, I suggest you look to the $43,000 you've saved from my contributions over the past 3 years. If my son doesn't fit into your family, Then your family doesn't fit into my life. Do not contact me again unless you are prepared to apologize sincerely to both David and Ethan, and to demonstrate that you have genuinely changed your views about race and family. Mia. I read it aloud to David, my hands trembling slightly. Perfect, he said, and send it. But first, I had one more thing to do. I opened my banking app and canceled the automatic transfer that was scheduled for the next day. Then I removed them from my emergency contact list, deleted their numbers from my phone, and blocked them on social media. 3 years of financial slavery ended with a few clicks on my phone. It felt like taking my first real breath in years. I sent the letter on Monday morning and then waited for the explosion. It came faster than I expected. By Tuesday afternoon, my phone was buzzing constantly with calls from unknown numbers. They'd clearly borrowed phones from friends and neighbors, trying to get around the block I'd put in place. I let them all go to voicemail. The messages were predictable. Confused hurt, anger, desperate attempts at guilt manipulation, and finally threats. Mia, it's your mother. I don't understand why you're being so dramatic about this. Call me back so we can discuss this like adults. This is your father. You're making a huge mistake, young lady. Family is family, and you can't just throw us away over a misunderstanding. Mia, this is ridiculous. We raised you better than this. You're being selfish and ungrateful. And frankly, we're disappointed in the woman you've become. And finally, the threats. If you don't call us back by Friday, we're driving over there to talk to you in person. This nonsense has gone on long enough. I saved every voicemail, documenting their escalating desperation and rage. David suggested we might need the evidence if they actually followed through on their threat to show up at our house uninvited. By Thursday, the calls had stopped. I assumed they'd given up, at least temporarily. I was wrong. Friday evening, I was making dinner when the doorbell rang. David went to answer it, and I heard familiar voices in the entryway. My parents, talking over each other in the frantic way people do when they're desperate. We just want to talk to her, Mom was saying. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding. She's not thinking clearly, Dad added. You have to understand we love Mia. We'd never do anything to hurt her. I walked into the living room to find them standing awkwardly by the front door, David blocking their path into the house. They looked smaller somehow, older and more fragile than I remembered. What are you doing here? I asked. We came to fix this, Mom said, reaching toward me, to explain what really happened. I know what happened. You made it very clear that my son isn't welcome in your family. That's not what we meant. That's exactly what you meant, I interrupted. And now that the money stopped flowing, suddenly you want to have a conversation. Dad stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Now you listen here, young lady. We supported you your entire life. We sacrificed so you could have opportunities we never had. You owe us. I owe you? I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. I've given you over $130,000 in the past 3 years. What exactly do I still owe you? Respect, he snapped. Loyalty. Recognition of everything we've done for you. What have you done for me lately? I asked. And I don't mean 30 years ago when you fed and housed me because that was your legal obligation as parents. What have you done for me as an adult? They stared at me, clearly expecting a different conversation. You haven't attended a single important event in my adult life unless it benefited you somehow. You didn't come to my college graduation because it was too far to drive. You've never celebrated my job promotions or professional achievements. You missed your grandson's first birthday because he's mixed race. We never said that. You didn't have to say it directly. Your actions said it loud enough. Mom tried a different approach, her voice becoming pleading. Mia, we love you. We love Ethan too, in our own way. We just need time to adjust. How much time? I asked. He's 13 months old. How much more time do you need to decide whether your grandson deserves your love? It's not that simple. Yes, it is. It's exactly that simple. Either you love us or you don't. Either you accept my family or you don't. Either you're willing to change your racist attitudes or you're not. The word racist hit them like a slap. Dad's face turned red. Mom's eyes filled with tears. And for the first time since they'd arrived, they were both speechless. We are not racist, Dad said finally, his voice dangerous. Then prove it, I challenged. Apologize to David for the way you've treated him. Ask to spend real time with Ethan. Show me that you're willing to be a real family instead of people who just happen to share DNA. They looked at each other, communicating silently in the way long-married couples do. We think you should be the one apologizing, Mom said finally, for cutting us off financially without warning, for blocking our numbers, for treating us like criminals when all we've ever done is love you. And there it was. Even faced with the choice between racism and family, they chose racism. Then we have nothing more to discuss, I said, moving toward the door. It's time for you to leave. Mia, leave now. And don't come back unless you're prepared to treat my husband and son with the respect they deserve. After they left, I stood in my living room shaking with adrenaline and relief. David wrapped his arms around me from behind. How do you feel? He asked. Free, I said, surprised by how true it was. For the first time in my adult life, I feel completely free. That freedom was about to be tested in ways I never could have imagined. The consequences of cutting off my parents became apparent within 2 weeks. It started with a frantic call from my Aunt Linda, Dad's sister, who lived across the country and had apparently been designated as the family mediator. Mia, honey, your parents are in crisis, she said without preamble when I answered the phone. They're about to lose their house. I was quiet for a moment, processing this information. I'm sorry to hear that. That's it? You're sorry to hear that? They could be homeless by the end of the month. Aunt Linda, they have over $40,000 in their checking account. They're not going to be homeless. What $40,000? They've been living paycheck to paycheck for years. The lies were so deeply embedded that even extended family believed them. My parents had been performing poverty while stockpiling the money I'd been sending them. Check with them about their savings, I suggested. I think you'll be surprised. Mia, I don't understand what's gotten into you. These are your parents. They raised you, sacrificed for you. They took $130,000 from me over 3 years while treating my husband and son like they didn't belong in the family because of their race. Silence. Then, that can't be true. Call them and ask them to explain why they missed Ethan's first birthday. Ask them what they meant when they said he doesn't fit into our family. I hung up before she could respond. Over the next few days, more family members called. Cousins, aunts, uncles, all with the same message. I was being unreasonable, ungrateful, cruel. My parents had told everyone a carefully edited version of events that cast them as victims of their selfish daughter's sudden abandonment. None of them seemed to know about the racist comments. None of them knew about the financial exploitation. None of them knew the truth. But the most illuminating call came from my brother Marcus, who I hadn't spoken to in months. Jesus Christ, Mia, he said when I answered. What the hell is going on? Mom called me crying, saying you've cut them off completely. Did she tell you why? Something about you being mad they missed the kid's birthday? That seems like an overreaction. Marcus, when was the last time you sent Mom and Dad money? What? Never. Why would I? When was the last time they asked you for money? He was quiet for a moment. They don't ask me. They say I'm still getting established in my career. You make 6 figures as an engineer in Silicon Valley. So I make half of what you make, and I've been sending them $800 a week for 3 years. The silence stretched long enough that I thought he'd hung up. $800 a week? He said finally. That's more than I spend on rent. And they never asked you to contribute anything? They always said you had it handled, that you wanted to help them. I felt a familiar rage building, but this time it was cleaner, purer. They played us against each other, Marcus. They made me believe I was the only one who could help them while telling you that I had it covered. But why would they? Because I was the easy target. The daughter who felt guilty for every good thing in her life, who believed that love had to be earned through sacrifice. You had boundaries? I didn't. Over the following days, Marcus did his own investigation. He talked to other family members, pieced together financial information, and discovered what I'd already learned. Our parents had been manipulating the family narrative for years. The revelation caused a rift in the extended family that was both predictable and necessary. Some relatives, particularly the older generation, continued to support my parents and view me as the villain. But others, especially those who'd felt pressured to contribute money or support over the years, began asking their own questions. It turned out I wasn't the only one who'd been financially exploited, just the most successful target. 3 weeks after I'd cut contact, Marcus called with an update that was both vindicating and heartbreaking. I confronted them, he said, about the money, about the lies, about what they said about David and Ethan. And? Dad denied the racist comments at first, but Mom broke down and admitted it. She said they were concerned about cultural differences and thought you'd be happier with someone more suitable. Someone white, you mean? Yeah. And Mia. When I asked them about the money they've been saving from your transfers, they said they were setting it aside for emergencies. $43,000 in emergencies they never told you about, while telling me they were struggling to pay for basic necessities. Exactly. I told them they owed you an apology and probably some money back. Dad said you made your choice and could live with the consequences. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Even faced with irrefutable evidence of their deception and bigotry, they chose pride over reconciliation. I'm sorry, Mia, Marcus said. I should have seen what was happening. I should have questioned why they never asked me to help. It's not your fault. They're master manipulators. What are you going to do now? I looked across the room at David, who was on the floor building block towers with Ethan, both of them laughing as our son knocked down each construction with gleeful abandon. "I'm going to focus on my real family," I said. "The people who love us exactly as we are." It was the right choice. But letting go of 28 years of conditioning would prove harder than I expected. 2 months later, I was loading groceries into my car when I spotted my mother in the parking lot of the same store. She was alone, looking older and more frail than I remembered, struggling with her own heavy bags. For a moment, our eyes met across the parking lot. She raised her hand tentatively, a small wave that contained years of regret and hope. I felt that familiar tug, the impulse to help, to fix, to make everything okay between us. For just a second, I considered walking over, offering to carry her bags, pretending the past few months had never happened. Then I thought about Ethan at home with David, practicing his new words and taking his wobbly first steps. I thought about the peace we'd found in our small family, the absence of criticism and manipulation and conditional love. I gave my mother a small nod acknowledgement without invitation and got into my car. The drive home gave me time to process what I'd felt in that moment. Sadness, yes, but not guilt. Not anymore. David was in the kitchen when I arrived. Ethan strapped into his high chair, both of them covered in what appeared to be mashed sweet potato. "How was grocery shopping?" David asked, kissing my cheek. "Educational," I said, settling into the chair beside Ethan's high chair. "I saw my mother." David paused in his cleaning. "How was that?" "Sad, but also clarifying." Ethan babbled something that sounded remarkably like "mama" and reached for me with sweet potato-covered hands. I gathered him into my arms, not caring about my clean shirt. "Clarifying how?" David asked. I realized I don't miss them. I miss the idea of them, the parents I wanted them to be, but I don't actually miss the people they really are. David nodded, understanding immediately. "That makes sense. I used to think cutting them off was this dramatic, temporary thing, like eventually we'd have some big reconciliation scene where they'd apologize and we'd all cry and hug and become a normal family. And now? Now I realize that some relationships aren't meant to survive honesty. Some people would rather lose their family than examine their prejudices." As if sensing the gravity of the conversation, Ethan settled against my chest, his little fingers playing with my necklace while he made soft baby sounds. "You know what's funny?" I said. "I spent 3 years working myself to exhaustion to prove I was a good daughter, but being a good daughter to them required me to be a bad mother and wife." "How so?" "They wanted me to prioritize their comfort over my family's well-being. They wanted me to accept their racism and make excuses for it. They wanted me to teach Ethan that love is conditional, that acceptance depends on looking the right way and believing the right things." David sat beside us on the couch, his hand finding mine. "And instead, I'm teaching him that he's loved exactly as he is, that his family will always have his back, that he never has to earn affection or tolerate disrespect." I looked around our living room, taking in the photos that lined our walls. Ethan's first steps, David's promotion celebration, our small wedding ceremony, moments of genuine joy and connection. Not a single picture included my parents. "I've been thinking about what family really means," I continued. "It's not about shared DNA or obligation or guilt. It's about choosing to love someone consistently, showing up when it matters, celebrating each other's happiness instead of competing with it." "Your parents' loss," David said simply. "Their choice?" I corrected. "They chose their prejudice over their grandchild. They chose money over genuine relationship. They chose pride over growth." My phone buzzed with a text notification. For a split second, my stomach clenched with familiar anxiety, the conditioned response to potential family drama. But it was just Sarah, our neighbor, asking if we wanted to join her family for a barbecue on Saturday. "Sarah wants to know if we're free this weekend for a cookout," I told David. "Tell her yes," he said immediately. "It'll be good for Ethan to play with other kids." I typed back our acceptance and felt something settle in my chest. This was family too. Chosen family. People who loved us without agenda, who celebrated our milestones and supported us through challenges. As the evening wound down and we put Ethan to bed, I found myself thinking about the money, not with regret, but with curiosity. $130,000 was a significant sum, but it had bought me something invaluable. Absolute clarity about who my parents really were and what our relationship had actually been. $130,000 to learn my parents were bigots. I've definitely paid less for more useful life lessons. Without that financial entanglement, I might have spent decades making excuses for their behavior, telling myself their love was complicated rather than conditional. Instead, I was free. Free to build the kind of family I wanted Ethan to grow up in. Free to love without keeping score. Free to set boundaries without guilt. As I tucked Ethan into his crib that night, He looked up at me with David's eyes and my stubborn chin, perfect and beautiful, and completely loved. "You're never going to have to earn your place in this family," I whispered to him. "You belong here just because you exist. That's what real love looks like." He fell asleep with a smile on his face, secure in the knowledge that he was treasured exactly as he was. A year later, David and I were married in a small ceremony surrounded by the people who'd supported us through everything. Marcus came, having formed his own boundaries with our parents after learning the full truth. Sarah and her family were there, along with David's relatives and friends from work who'd become like family over the years. My parents weren't invited. It wasn't an act of cruelty, just clarity. Our wedding was about celebrating love and commitment, not performing forgiveness for people who'd never asked for it. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe. Sometimes the hardest thing about loving yourself is disappointing the people who never really loved you anyway. But on the other side of that disappointment is freedom, peace, and the possibility of building something beautiful with people who choose to see your worth every single day. That's a trade I'd make again in a heartbeat.